Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, a Sega CD movie port, Sega's Hyped Up Fighter, and the 4 Ninja Turtles go one-on-one. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is December 22nd, 1993. When one of the biggest games of all time comes to your console, try to see if you can do it better. Released in December 1993 for the Sega Genesis, was Eternal Champions.
Eternal Champions is gonna eat your old fighting games for lunch. No wonder it has 9 huge warriors, 3 training modes, and over 315 martial arts moves. Bon appetit. Eternal Champions, only on Sega Genesis.
Eternal Champions is a one-on-one fighting game. Play as numerous fighters from all different points in time to challenge and replace the Ultimate Warrior, the Eternal Champion. Use punches, kicks, and special moves to take down your opponent. You can't spam the same special moves over and over though, as you have a yin-yang meter that depletes with every special attack. You have to wait for it to recharge, but you can also use taunts to decrease your opponent's yin-yang. Play through the single-player arcade mode or take on a friend in 2-player versus and go for the overkills. Eternal Champions was developed and published by Sega. It was created from the start with one goal and one goal only: to ride the same wave created by Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat. Sure, they made a lot of money with the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat, but they didn't make all the money. Their plan was to basically combine the two. Have the special moves and character variety of Street Fighter, but also have the violence of Mortal Kombat. It was another game designed to make use of the relatively fresh 6-button Sega Genesis controller, following the same control scheme as Street Fighter II. 3 punches, 3 kicks. Not only that, it featured overkills, an all-new innovative way to finish off your opponents. These were secret ways that would kill the defeated player in bloody, brutal finishers. It was trying to discover these that helped give the game more replayability. Basically, they're stage fatalities, and I always found them way too hard to pull off as a kid. Eternal Champions was a game that Sega of America pushed really hard to be a big thing. It was first previewed in the summer of 1993, so early that all of the characters didn't even have names yet. They were called things like Alien Adversary, Pirate Gal, Cyborg, and perhaps a little too on the nose, Street Fighter. Sega was being secretive. They were intentionally trickling out information instead of giving full previews. It was the October 1993 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly that finally revealed some of the characters: Shadow, Xavier, and Larson. Shadow and Larson seem to be favorites of the developers, which we'll explain why in just a little bit. Then, the November 1993 issue of EGM talked about 3 more characters. And finally, in EGM's December 1993 issue, they previewed the game in a whopping 12 pages, showing off every single character and all of their special moves. More importantly, each page showed how to perform all of their attacks with the Sega Activator.
Discover a new world of moves and combinations that simply aren't possible with normal controllers. You'll be surprised how quickly your body catches on. The Activator lets you be creative. Unleash that inner warrior. Better yet, unleash 2 inner warriors by going head-to-head with another Activator. There's never been anything like this. Jump into the action with the Activator, the next level of interactive gameplay from, who do you think? Sega!
The Sega Activator was an accessory for the Sega Genesis that allowed you to play fighting games with your whole body. You stand in the middle of the ring and then punch and kick the air around you to do attacks in the game. Only a handful of games were programmed to make special use of the Sega Activator: Best of the Best Championship Karate, Streets of Rage 3, Greatest Heavyweights, and Eternal Champions. Eventually, the Activator itself had Eternal Champions bundled in with it. It still worked like garbage. The forced hype didn't stop there. That very same issue of EGM also had a contest. Beat the game, take a picture of the end sequence, and you could win a Sega CD. There was also limited edition Slurpee cups that you could get at 7-Elevens. They also made a Tiger Electronics pocket arcade of the game in 1994, plus a one-shot comic book And the Sonic comic had a handful of special Eternal Champions issues. But what mattered were the reviews. How did the game do when it came out? Well, it was either way better than Street Fighter 2 or a mediocre clone, depending on who you asked. GamePro magazine gave it very high scores. UK magazine, Sega Mean Machine, awarded it a 97%. EGM's reviews were divided, with some loving it and others finding it very average. Still, it sold a lot. It was enough that it would get a sequel on the Sega CD in 1995. Some of the favored characters would also get spin-offs. Larson would star in the 1995 Game Gear exclusive Chicago Syndicate, and Shadow would star in Experts for the Genesis in 1996. Both games are very bad. There was a planned third Eternal Champions game for the Sega Saturn, but it was scrapped as to not take any attention away from Sega's Virtua Fighter. And if you want to play Eternal Champions now, it's on Steam for $1. He who controls the spice controls the universe. Also released in December 1993, was Dune for the Sega CD. Dune is a point-and-click adventure game with some strategy elements thrown in. Wander the planet of Arrakis talking to numerous inhabitants. Convince them to join your cause by talking to them, solving their problems, and getting them to work for your spice mining colony. Each of them will have different benefits, such as better mining or combat training. All of it takes place in real time, so be swift with your choices and actions. You can also switch to your strategic view to give orders and build facilities. Mine more spice, watch out for sandworms, and destroy all of the Harkonnen fortresses. Dune, the game, was originally made for Amiga and MS-DOS computers in 1992 by Cryo Interactive, and then ported onto the Sega CD. The Sega CD version uses the graphics of the Amiga game, but has the voice acting of the CD-ROM upgrade and includes some scenes from the 1984 movie. Creation for the game started when Martin Alfer, the founder of publisher Virgin Interactive, loved the original novel for Dune and really badly wanted to make a game on it, getting the rights for it after Dune author Frank Herbert's passing in 1990. All the while, he had to convince the US branch of Virgin that making a Dune video game would work, so his team developed in secret before they had the go-ahead. It all resulted in a successful 1992 release and lots of copies sold. Ports of it were immediately planned, such as for the Super Nintendo, and even potentially for the NES and the Sega Master System. The only port that it got, though, was the one for the Sega CD. Previews for it, such as the one found in EGM issue 51, explain that it isn't just a port, it's better than the PC version because it's easier to play thanks to the cleaned up interface. However, it was also slightly confusing because at the same time they're talking about Dune coming up for the Sega CD, there was also previews for Dune 2 for the Sega Genesis, which is an entirely different game. More coverage went to the cartridge sequel than the CD port. Still, it was a good port of a good game. Electronic Gaming Monthly scored the Sega CD version with an average score of an 8 out of 10. GamePro magazine gave perfect scores for graphics and sound, but less on the fun factor because they hate it when there's too much talking in video games. UK magazine Mega, which covered all things Sega Mega Drive, would go on to call Dune the 10th best Mega CD game of all time. If you want to play this version of Dune now, get yourself a Sega CD and a copy of the game. Although, the original PC release is considered abandonware now. As if one fighting game competitor wasn't enough, there was another. Also released in December 1993 was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Super NES and Sega Genesis.
Tamed by success, the turtles lost their savage edge. Greed is dead. It's a new breed carved from the streets. Concrete fist batter alien flesh, one on one. As power joins forces with rage, ripping through fear, and no one sheds a tear for mutilated mutants. Giant warriors crushed by street tough turtles who have shed soft shells for a hard dose of reality in Konami's Tournament Fighters.
TMNT Tournament Fighters is a one-on-one fighting game. Play as any of the 4 turtles, plus some new characters and some familiar foes, as they battle each other to determine who is the strongest to take down Shredder. Punch, kick, and use special moves to defeat your opponent. As you hit each other, a meter fills up underneath the health bar. Once it hits full, you can unleash a super special attack. Play the story mode, save Splinter, yell cowabunga, and go home to have some pizza afterwards. Tournament Fighters was developed and published by Konami and was their response to the rising popularity of fighting games thanks to Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat. Plus, They already had been making a bunch of stellar Ninja Turtles games. Surely one based on them would be a recipe for automatic success. There are two versions and they have some pretty major differences. Gameplay-wise, the SNES controller used 2 punch and 2 kick buttons, whereas the Sega version defaulted to the 3-button controller, so it had 1 punch, 1 kick, and a taunt button. For stronger hits, you had to hold forward toward the opponent and press the attack button. The Super NES version also has an all-new character named Asuka. She's an original character that's basically just another ninja who uses her butt to attack and helps give the roster some much-needed female representation. However, she was supposed to be an established TMNT character. March 1993 saw the theatrical release of the movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, which saw the Turtles getting transported back in time to feudal Japan. In the movie, they team up with a leader of the rebellion named Mitsu. Thanks to some people diving deep into leaked beta versions of TMNT Tournament Fighters, you can see that Asuka was at one point Mitsu. But the third movie sucked really badly, so much like the rest of us, Konami just sort of erased that reality from our memories. There's more. The Genesis version is quite different. Their super special moves can only be used when you're almost out of life. You can destroy parts of the stage, and the plot is about fighting the Turtles clones from Dimension X. The taunts had some voice lines, which was neat, but most importantly, it had 2 playable characters that the SNES version didn't. Casey Jones and April O'Neil. The April O'Neil one is kind of a big deal because I'm pretty sure this was the first time that April became playable in any Ninja Turtles game. Both games had the Turtles using weird special moves though, like spitting fireballs from their mouths weird. The game was a big enough deal that it was the cover story for GamePro's December 1993 issue, and a huge spread in Nintendo Power's January 1994 issue. Reviews for it were also quite good. Nintendo Power gave the SNES version a 3.5 out of 5, and EGM gave it an 8.75 out of 10 with the Editor's Choice Gold Award. The Sega Genesis version, however, was a bit more divided. GamePro liked it quite a bit, with a 4 out of 5 for every category, but EGM found it far inferior to the Super Nintendo counterpart, resulting in a 5.4 out of 10 average score. Konami wasn't done though. They also had TMNT Tournament Fighters coming for the NES, but it would take a couple of months before that would release. The 16-bit games would not get ported or released until 2022's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga Edition, which has a huge collection of 90s TMNT games, including the fighting games. Both got enhancements, such as not needing special codes to unlock any of the characters, and the Super NES version comes with online versus play. And for everything else released this week, here's Editor Dylan.
Battle Blaze on the Super Nintendo is a one-on-one fighter with a funny twist. You use the D-pad and only 2 buttons. One attacks and the other jumps. Unless my controller inputs weren't mapped right in the emulator console. Here's a tip. If you're reinventing a genre, try not to make it more awkward with less features. It's bare bones, generic. It really makes you wonder just how many fighting games came out in the 90s. Fatal Fury Special released this week on the Neo Geo, and it's arguably the best one so far. I lost count of how many times I talked about the first 2, but it's got my Shiranui in it again, so I can care this time. What? Don't look at that. Take the best of both Fatal Furies, balance and tweak the controls, and then add extra features like bonus characters, including what they dubbed a secret dream match, where you face off against Rio from Art Fighters. I forget. I'm tired, man. What do you want? This eventually snowballed into another fighting game franchise called King of Fighters that probably has a date on it, but when did we start caring about those? Sorry. This game arguably inspired a certain Sakurai to make a certain 64 game that sorta rhymes with Pooper Splash Butters. Anyway, the game's good. It's got Mai in it, which is more than I could say about Floopy Trash Rubbers. And it's got the guy from everyone's favorite fighting franchise, you know, the art one. Wait, you didn't forget, did you? It's been on the show at least twice. Well, if you forgot, then count yourself lucky this week because we also got the Super Nintendo version of Art of Fighting. That's what it was called. That was driving me nuts. It's kind of like Fatal Fury, but without my Shiranui in it, and now my brain is switching to autopilot. BRB. Sports game. sports game. I had several commercials, but YouTube just told us we're demonetized because we're using someone else's content without making significant changes to the sports game. Now I'm terrified to post anything relevant, even if it adds context to the sports game. Sports game. But let's be real, we all know I wouldn't be able to add much anyway, even if I had played the sports game. Steam code. Steam code? Sports game. And I'm back from autopilot. What'd I miss? It probably wasn't important, but this show can't always be fun and games as the Sega Genesis equivalent of Mario Paint. And I gotta admit, I'm pleasantly surprised. The Music Maker is just as robust, the minigames aren't 52 levels of action, awful, and you can even play it with a controller instead of a mouse. Unless I picked a hacked version of the ROM on my emulator. Console. Plus, there's a whole bunch of pre-made songs to mess around with. Let's give one a listen. Hey, is that Jingle Bells? Oh yeah, I almost forgot. It's the holidays. And what better way to celebrate than with Home Alone 2 on the Sega Genesis? Many better ways is the answer to that question. It's actually not as bad as I thought it would be. The level layout and core gameplay is as frustrating as you'd expect, but the controls are much more responsive than you'd get in a typical movie tie-in game. It doesn't hold a candle to the previous Home Alone game on Genesis, but there are far worse things to receive under the Christmas tree. Mario's Time Machine for the SNES. We're ending it with a bang, aren't we? The same edutainment devs that brought us Mario is Missing decided to teach us all about history this time around, but not before grabbing 10 mushrooms and surfing into a whirlpool. That should go without saying. So what does Sir Isaac Newton have to say when he first meets Mario? Away with you, small person, worst birthday ever. To quote me from last week, Sir Isaac Newton can eat a dick! Why are there so many games that just feel like they're eating away all my free time? Why should I go around talking to people if I already know exactly where Newton could stick his apple? And then there's this guy! A Merry Christmas to you, sir. Whoa. I didn't expect anyone to wish me a Merry Christmas in this game. You know what? 'Tis the season indeed. I gotta look more on the positives. I should be more thankful for getting to experience so many games I haven't played yet. It's not like they're all bad. Sometimes I even find new favorites I've never heard of. And while I'm at it, another great thing about doing this show is experiencing the joy and excitement of someone who reunites with a game that absolutely transports them straight back to their childhood. Then a wave of pure, comforting nostalgia washes over them as they re-experience a once dormant encapsulation of simpler times. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to dread awful flops and mountains of sports games next year. I want to jumpstart the holidays with good vibes and good games. Why are we still in the 1680s when all we want to do is go back to the 1990s again? And we don't need a time machine to do that. We just need a little glimpse at what we could look forward to. But before we do that, 17 games came out on these consoles this final week in 1993. Let us know what games you're most excited about for 1994. Happy holidays, and have a Merry and Berry Cider. Hopefully, I'll see you all next year.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, Eternal Champions is super common. It had a retail price of $69.95, and now the game is only worth $6. Complete with a box and manual, it only goes up to $12. Dune for the Sega CD isn't very high either. It had a retail price of $62.95, and now you can get the disc for about $40, and the complete one for about $55. Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters also hasn't retained much value for either one. The Genesis game is $10 and the SNES game is $20. With their boxes and instruction manuals, the Sega one goes up to $35 and the Nintendo one up to $80. And that's it for today. Next week, we'll be taking off for the holidays. But don't worry, we'll be returning the week after as we turn the clocks forward to a new year. All the way to the year 21XDX. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I wanted to take a moment and say thank you to every single person who watches this show for giving us such an awesome year. This was a really, really fun year for the channel, and we love doing the show. We love seeing the response and how many people like watching it. So Huge thank you to everyone who watches. Huge thank you to everyone on our Patreon who helps support the show. There's a link in the description if you're in a position to help us grow that way. And I do want to give some special shout outs to some of our patrons like Mega Drive Man, Tom Perslin, and CavDog26. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games this week, and subscribe if you aren't already. And if you are subscribed, you can watch the show every single Friday. I played a lot of Eternal Champions as a kid because my spoiled kindergarten friend had Eternal Champions and we ended up playing it a lot. My favorite character ended up being Larson, and he kept playing as Rax. And all I remember him doing was that Rax weird like triple kick attack over and over again. And all I tried to do was figure out how I could climb around on the ceiling.